world we live in is changing fast. What will missions look like tomorrow? How is an emerging generation responding as they grow into their 20s and their 30s to the Great Commission? What will missions look like for them? I am joined by Reverend Dr. Nicole Martin, COO of Christianity Today. She is going to share some insights and trends she's seeing that she thinks will affect the way this generation does missions in the future. Today on the Urbana Podcast. Welcome to the Urbana Podcast. This is the show where we empower Christian leaders on college campuses with the tools and strategies to help students address the challenges facing our world and advance the gospel's reach to the ends of the earth.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Urbana Podcast. I'm Phoebe Jeske, and I'm joined today by the Director of Urbana, Mark Matlock. Mark, how are you doing today?
You know, Phoebe, I am doing great. I've had a really just fun week working with a lot of different organizations that are doing campus ministry all over the country, and it's in the world really. And we had a great time together here in Dallas, and so I'm been excited.
What's one highlight moment for you from the last week?
Everybody's just talking about the spiritual fervor that they're seeing on college and university campuses across the U.S. in different ways. And I think it just is an exciting moment to see that God is at work with young adults. And I think that was the thing. It's one thing when one person experiences it, but when you're all together in a room and you're all like, oh, you too, that's pretty cool. So you just realize God is doing something here. And that kind of makes me anticipating Urbana. In fact, several people, I spoke a little bit about Urbana and why I think this Urbana, it could be like a part of just a coming wave of kind of, mission imagination. And people were just like, yes, the timing of Urbana with what we see happening on these campuses is pretty exciting. So Wow. It was just really fun.
That's exciting. Yeah, it's nice to think about how December might be a catalyst for a lot of that movement that the Spirit seems to be doing on these campuses. Yeah, excited to see what happens there.
Yeah. So, today we have an interview with Nicole Martin. Have you ever met Nicole, Phoebe?
I haven't.
Nicole is, I don't know how many years we've been friends. It's been a while, but she is just one of the just greatest people to know, and one of the smartest people I know, and an effective leader. So anyway, I'm excited for you to meet Nicole. So let's get into that, and then we can talk a little bit about these trends and observations that Nicole is seeing and what it means to us in this moment. I am joined today here with the Reverend Dr. Nicole Martin, the Chief Operating Officer of Christianity Today. Would you welcome Nicole Martin to the Urbana Podcast? Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Mark. I can hear the imaginary applause in the background. That was awesome.
All over the country and the world, people applauding.
That's great.
Nicole, you and I have known each other a long time. We've had some really fun experiences together, running away from COVID in an Uber ride while everybody else that was in our group got COVID. We did not. We escaped. But I remember sitting in the Atlanta airport as we were going our separate ways, sitting at a table going, should we be touching this table?
Yes,
should we?
Exactly. I remember that fondly. Yes.
That was a very, very interesting moment. So,
yep.
Anyway, you're going to be speaking at Urbana, and I am so glad that you said yes.
Oh, man. I am so looking forward to this conference. I mean, I've been praying about it. I'm excited about it. I just believe God's going to do something really special during our time together.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a moment. Let's talk about the nature of big events.
Yeah.
Some people say he goes to big events and more likes big. I disagree. Obviously, I'm choosing to run this, and I've run big events all my life, and I've not seen them decline. Some events do fade over time, but God still uses these types of things. What's your experience been with big events?
Yeah, it's funny. Something happens when you get a group of people together who believe that something great is going to happen. And I'm speaking in kind of secular ways in that way, but when you specifically get believers together, trusting God, all expecting the Lord to show up, it just makes room for a level of vulnerability and authenticity and relationship and expectation that makes room for God to move. And I can remember, first of all, I went to Urbana when I was in college, and I remember it wasn't just the big gathering, it was the fact that I deepened relationships with people I went with, and I met new friendships. And together we got a chance to be encouraged, challenged, and then to put that to work almost immediately in service to others and in our fields of study. So that for me is something that really stands out. And I also think when we can kind of be in a space where, in my context, we would say we would touch and agree. Like when there's a common agreement that we are believing God together, then we start to see prayer for other people happen too. So you're in this big event, you're hearing a word from God, you're worshiping together, and you're not just believing God for yourself, but you're believing God for someone else. And I think those become the defining moments of our relationships with God, of our knowledge of ourselves, and our care for other people as well.
Yeah, there's just something about setting apart time and space. And, so much in our routine, everyday aspects of our lives, sometimes we encounter these moments, but there's something about stepping out of the routine, isn't there?
Yes, yeah.
And getting this time that's just out of rhythm. You're thrown off a little bit. It activates parts of your brain that you're not normally activated. But at the same time, the Lord just meets us in these thin spaces where heaven and earth just almost feel like there's no separation between the two. And I think Urbana is that kind of a moment for a lot of people. I've described Urbana as a direction-setting event, which doesn't necessarily mean a lot to some people. But for me, it's like this once-in-a-lifetime kind of experience. Some people are blessed to have more than one, but it kind of sets you up for the future at that stage of life. What year did you go? What was your Urbana year?
Oh, geez. I want to say it was it 95 or 96?
Okay,
no. It couldn't have been that. It was after, because I was in Charlotte. Sorry, I'm extroverting out loud here.
That's all right.
I want to say it was 2001 or 2002.
Okay.
That's when it was, 2001 or 2.
2001
because I specifically remember I had just graduated from college.
Were you in St. Louis or the University of Illinois?
University of Illinois.
Okay, so then it was probably 2001.
Yes.
Or 2000.
Yes, it was 2001. And I went with a friend of mine. I had just kind of started wrestling with my sense of calling, where I was wondering whether or not I'm called to ministry. And I had a friend in Charlotte at the time who had just accepted her calling to ministry. So we both go to this conference, and it just set me on fire. And what I liked about Urbana is it put a missions tilt on my sense of calling. It wasn't just like, go take over the world. It was go and live and be a witness in a context that will minister to you, and one where you can kind of share with and minister to. That's what it was. Thank you for that question. That's great.
Yeah, my year was 1990, so I was a little bit ahead of you, but we know this. And it was, for me, what you said is really interesting. I actually felt called to the mission field at Urbana. Not everybody does. What's interesting is I didn't actually ever go to the mission field. God's actually direction for me was to move to Texas and to start doing youth ministry, something I was not interested in. But if I hadn't gone to Urbana, I don't think I would have come to that point of surrender.
Absolutely.
And that global piece that you talk about. I mean, I've talked to people that have gone into business and all kinds of different things, but they say, boy, Urbana introduced me to global Christianity.
Absolutely.
Was that your experience?
Absolutely. And prior to that time, I was a French major in college. So I did a study abroad in France. I loved just global ministry in general, but being in a space with hundreds and probably thousands at that time, yes, thousands of other young people who were just like, yeah, well, of course we'll be global. Of course we'll study globally. It really normalizes something that makes you feel quite odd when you're younger. You're like, why do I want this international bend in my life? And then you realize, oh, that's because it's a normal thing. That's because God is doing this in lots of lives, not just mine.
Well, probably when you were at Urbana in the early 2000s there, you didn't know that you'd get your PhD.
Right.
You didn't know that you'd be a reverend. You didn't know that you would be the COO of Christianity Today. You probably couldn't have even seen that in the future ahead of you, yet God was building that in you at that moment.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of students that are going to come to Urbana and they're going to be carrying questions about their future, about their direction, their doubts about what does God want me to do? Do I matter, or do I, is this significant where I want to go and contribute? But now it's at Christianity Today, and you get a chance to see kind of what's going on all over the world right now. So I want to talk to you today about some of the trends that you're seeing as you're kind of just looking at the landscape of Christianity, because Urbana, because it engages, that 20-something audience. This is really the future direction of things. And there are moments of change in the world where Urbana comes and it just, and I think we might be at one of those kind of inflection points.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about what you're observing. What's Nicole Martin going, this has got my attention.
Yeah. So I've been kind of watching a couple of different trends that some of them are very encouraging and some of them are just like, I'm still trying to figure it out. So one I'm trying to figure out is just the true impact of technology and specifically artificial intelligence. So I was at a conference, Institute for the Future, and they talked about this uncanny valley that we have entered the space where technology and AI is advancing at such a pace that we can no longer try to make sense of it. You just got to go with the flow. And they used this acronym BANI, B-A-N-I. They said the future is brittle. It's not like a vase that falls on the ground and you just have big pieces and you kind of glue it back together and you still have the same vase. It is brittle, meaning it breaks and it shatters. The only way you're going to get that back is if you build something new. So what we're experiencing with the dramatic changes in technology are shattering our preconceived notions. We're going to have to build new vessels for understanding through technology. The A is anxious, that the future is more anxious than we've ever been. I mean, we can see that on every level. Anxiety is just so common, but it's enhanced every single day with all of the unknowns. The N was for nonlinear. This idea that AI creates a democratization of our society. Anyone and everyone can be an expert through ChatGPT as one example. And you can start to see that. And then the I was for incomprehensible. And I kept thinking to myself, what does the gospel have to say to a brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible world that will be shaped so much by AI that my kids will not know a phone without AI? They will not know selecting channels because AI will have a sense of what they want to watch. They won't know changing the radio because their AI is going to know the types of songs they like to hear. I think the gospel has a lot to say in that kind of world about the anchor of Christ and the truth of the gospel and the relevance of the word that is Alpha and Omega. It's the beginning and the end. So I feel like that's one trend. AI is shaping who we are, it's shaping our relationships, it's shaping how we show up, but we have to come to a place where the gospel still has ground for that. The second trend is among women in younger generations. And you and I were both at the State of the Church, I believe, where the statistic was discussed about women, younger women leaving the church, which is an unusual statistic because we've traditionally seen young women and women in general as the foundation, the backbone of churches. But I've been really...
And the mission movement in a lot of ways,
Yes,
right? I mean,
absolutely.
Women were some of the greatest pioneers in missions. Yeah.
In going, in funding, in supporting, in training. I mean, every aspect of missions. So
here's a little fun fact.
Yeah,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was at the Tabernacle Church in Salem, where Adoniram Judson and the other 4 missionaries. What I did not realize is that Ann Judson, his wife, was such a critical factor in his work, and that a lot of these women couldn't be validated to go and take the gospel elsewhere unless they were married. So a lot of them were looking for guys that wanted to go overseas to marry so that they could do the work. But she was, while he was in jail and stuff, she was incredible in the work that she did, and got to talk to with an expert there. And just amazing, the hidden role of women that doesn't get enough attention in terms of what's going on. But this is a crisis, so keep going.
Yes, it is. Well, no, this is an important point, because women have always played a critical role in ministry. So if young women no longer see a space for themselves in the church, then there ought to be something we can do. And it bothers me that there's a pendulum in the minds of some leaders. If you work hard to draw women, then you're going to lose men. If you work hard to draw men, then you're going to lose women. But I don't think that the gospel ever says that. I think that the ministry of Jesus demonstrates that he draws men and women unto himself. So there's for me, this growing sense of concern. Is it because young women are being educated and trained and raised to believe that they can literally do anything in the world except in the church? Is it because the theology of the church only lends itself to women serving in careers and fields and spaces and ministry that are on the sidelines? Or is it because the gospel that we are preaching and teaching is not strong enough to manage this brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible world, and women are the first ones to say, I think I'll find something else? I mean, I think there are too many variables to pin it down to one, but these are just the technology and the young women trends. Those are the ones that I'm paying attention to right now, and I'm trying to see what's the role of the gospel, what's my role as a leader, and how does a conference like Urbana give us room to speak about the non-changing word of God in the midst of these kinds of changes?
Yeah, what's so interesting, not only are we seeing women joining the ranks of the religiously unaffiliated, or the nuns, the NONESs, but we're seeing also also young men returning to the church.
Yes.
And so there's this other, interesting phenomenon. Women are heading out, and young men are finding faith too, which is something else that we're seeing as a groundswell. So there's something generationally that's happening that just feels very fertile,
Yes.
I don't know that it's negative or bad. But it's something that just says the Spirit is at work here, and there's opportunity for something to take place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What else are you seeing out there, Nicole?
Oh, so many things. There's so much to see out there in the wild world. But going to our conversation about missions, there is kind of like a flattening of the earth in some ways. I'm seeing more of an ease of a global connection amongst younger generations in particular. Like my parents, I don't think they got a chance to travel internationally until after they'd been married for almost 10 years, and they got married right out of college. I had a chance to go internationally when I was in high school. My kids had a chance to go internationally when they were in elementary school. So we see this accessibility of the world, not just in travel, but in knowledge and in awareness. So we're seeing that. We're seeing a rise of the importance of storytelling. I mean, from the CT vantage point, we've always been fascinated by stories, but we're seeing more avenues for people to tell their story. And that is both wonderful and a tiny bit scary, because the access to being able to tell your story to whoever you want is just a gifted, beautiful thing, especially when it's redemptive. The challenge is we're now starting to tell our stories in a way that sometimes aren't truthful, to tell our stories in a way that sometimes just kind of build kind of homogenous circles, and we're becoming less tolerant of stories we don't like or stories we can't connect with. So we're seeing, for example, there may be an artist who is all into spoken word. So that person's social media platforms, their news channels, their WhatsApp, their groups will all be people who love the arts. But what about people who love other parts of life? That artist may or may not ever have access to those people based on algorithms, based on their own kind of pulling a circle of people together that have stories like themselves. So the whole idea of people like themselves is becoming even more real, and in some cases even more dangerous. Because if I'm only around people like me and who tell me I'm wonderful, then I'm most likely not seeing the full me, and therefore I'm not seeing the fullness of God. I mean, we could go on and on. I know you're seeing some of these things as well. And you have the advantage of research being able to show just how, I know we've got a lot of statistics about division, but to me, part of that is also this craving to hear an echo of my own voice in other people. Like we have this society that just, we want to hear ourselves. We just want to hear ourselves in other people. And that's kind of dangerous.
Well, especially when the algorithms are feeding that to us.
Oh, yes,
so
yes.
right now, my algorithms on Facebook, I'm seeing magic tricks and candy making.
That is so great. I'm not surprised.
And so it's like,
man.
yes, I have these happy candy makers that are pulling candy by hand. And I don't know why, but I keep watching them and it keeps strengthening the algorithm.
Yep.
The other thing is I started like just saying happy anniversary to people. And now more than anything else, I see people's anniversary posts, which is actually quite wonderful, but
nice.
but it is funny how the algorithm starts shaping, like where I was like going, wow, all my friends are like having anniversaries, but then I realized, oh, wait a minute, it's feeding me that because I was responding to those. And so then it was feeding me that and making sure I was seeing it. And our perception is really, I think, in jeopardy right now.
Yes, I agree. Our empathy, I think, is also at risk. So I don't have the capacity to understand where someone else is coming from if everyone in my world appears to be in the exact same space as I am. So this applies socioeconomically. This applies in terms of our race and ethnicity. This applies in terms of every classification we have. The more I start to think that everybody around me is like me, the lower my capacity is for even understanding. And I think this is where we get that otherism happening. The people on the other side are not just wrong, but they're demonic. They are not Christian. They're not true. They're not real. They're not right. That's where I think we have to be very careful. And again, going back to Urbana, we have this opportunity to bring all of these different people from different backgrounds and different spaces to disrupt their algorithms, even by them friending another person who's different from themselves. So this is the ability to see the gospel weave in and out of the divisions of the world. And I pray that is exactly what happens, because Lord knows we need that.
Now, you've mentioned about how easy it is for us to get around and be a part of the greater world, also to be hyper isolated.
Yes.
So one of the things I've noticed in talking to, those millennials that are kind of like in their later 20s, and then the kind of Gen Z coming up, is this issue of missions as colonialism.
Yes.
And going, hey, it's, it might not just be a bad idea to go to people of another culture, but then to take our religion to a group of other people, that's wrong. How do we deal with that theologically when, the Great Commission tells us to go into all the world and share this good news with people, but we find out now, looking at history, maybe sometimes the good news that missionaries were sharing wasn't always good for people.
Yeah, I've actually seen a lot of that. And for me, I don't think the issue is colonialism that shows up in going from here to Uganda. I think the issue of colonialism is I care more about a Ugandan than I do about the Ugandan who lives next door. And I think what we need to demonstrate for young people today is the gospel is worth sharing with your neighbor, with your Uber driver, with the person at the checkout counter. And it is because of that we have a desire to share it overseas. For me, the disruption is when we start to value people in another country as more ready for the gospel, as more worthy of the gospel, then we do have room for colonialism. And I remember it was probably like several years ago. I want to say you were on the ABS board around this time. We had John Chestnut speak to the board, and he was talking about the changing of missions at the time at Wycliffe.
Yeah.
And
So
I remember
John, for those who don't know, John was the president of Wycliffe Bible Translators, but I first met John when he was a middle school pastor in Colorado. Yeah. So I've known John for a long time.
Oh my gosh.
We got some history.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you know, John is very thoughtful, very passionate.
Yes.
And we were having just this side conversation about missions, and the colonialism thing came up. And he said, you know, the hardest part is it's not just American colonialism where we go overseas and we teach people you have to have quiet time and you have to know how to read and you have to read the Bible and have your quiet time and have your little basket and you have to have all these, you know, Western accoutrements. He said, now we're also seeing Chinese missionaries who are sharing the gospel and saying, and now you have to eat with chopsticks and you have to, you know, you can only come to God by bowing your head very low. So it's not just American colonialism. It's not just Western. Colonialism is a fact of human life, and we must fight against it in every way. But I do believe one of the ways to fight against that is to see the gospel as worth sharing, period, in your own context, in your own location. Because in addition to colonialism, if we're not careful, we also have to contend with escapism. I don't want to share the gospel to my neighbor, but I'd rather escape and go to Uruguay, and then maybe I can find a new life and take on a new persona, become a new person, and then I'll be willing to share the gospel. That's another thing we have to be careful of. So I think it starts at home, and we got to start it like right where we are.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I really do believe that my understanding of Christianity has increased because of multiculturalism.
Yes.
And taking the gospel to people of other cultures and seeing what the good news, how the good news is good news to them.
Yes.
And realizing that some of what I thought was good news for me was really not good news. It was ritual. It was some kind of form that was bound in culture that might have had meaning to me. You know, there's a really interesting case study in missions called you know, the marimba can't be in the church. And when people in Latin America were coming to Christ, the marimba was associated with sensuality. And so that was, we do not play the marimba in church. But then another generation grows up that never knew the marimba in a sensual way. And they're like, why are we not playing this fantastic instrument? Right? And so it's this idea that the gospel redeems everything. And sometimes it's only in the sharing of the gospel cross-culturally that we're even able to see, like, oh, this actually, it wasn't as redeemed as maybe I thought it was. You know, as the Pharisees, you know, trying to push things on the Sabbath that weren't ever meant for the Sabbath. And Jesus says, hey, you know, man was not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man, right? And sometimes I think that's what we forget when we've shared our faith, is we've realized, no, wait a minute, the gospel is for men. We weren't made for the gospel, right? You know, and so I think there's kind of an interesting thing around that. And I feel like nobody's probably self-examined themselves more than the missions community.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, we've done a lot. There have been things that have been done in the past and the distant past. I mean, there's probably recent stories too, but but I think we are learning, and we are trying to learn how to honor cultures. And but this is a new moment too, because this globalization is allowing for some of this in a new way. What do you think that means for the future? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I do think that missions offers us a lens of cultural intelligence that's really necessary. And you're right. It is not just an overseas cultural awareness. It's a right at home. It's an in your own city, in your own state, in your own location multiculturalism. And I would long for the day when younger generations who will be and are increasingly more diverse than previous generations, where they start to see a way of glorifying and honoring, maybe not glorifying, a way of honoring and elevating cultural difference without falling into the framework of a syncretistic gospel. And again, this is where it gets really complicated, because we want missionaries to teach us how to go to, let's say, I don't even know, I can't say Singapore, that's mostly Christian, but let's say we want to teach them to go to some far place, and we want them to learn culture with an eye toward appreciation and understanding, but we do not want them to become that culture. And I would say the same thing here today. When I'm raising my daughters, 10 and 12, I want them to respect cultures. I want them to see a hijab, know what it is, and respect that some young girls will wear a hijab. I want them to see and understand the kippah on the, for young Jewish boys. And I want them to understand this is what that means. But I don't want them to understand in a way that says it's your God. I want them to understand it in a way that says, because of the gospel, you have a love to extend to people who are not like you. And if God opens the door so that the young woman in the hijab or the young boy with the kippah asks you about your faith, I want you to stand flat-footed on the gospel of Jesus Christ and know that it's not just your tradition. It is the saving power of Jesus Christ. That's a tense, complex space. But in many ways, it becomes the precursor of missions. So ideally, missionaries know how to do that. They know how to love and appreciate culture while still understanding the value of the gospel. So maybe that's the greatest gift that we can offer to younger generations from a missional understanding. The gospel is real and true and relevant, even as you respect the cultural differences of others and religious differences as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I think to any person who's listening going, boy, I don't know about this missions thing.
Yeah.
Come to Urbana, because I think you're going to hear about global Christianity.
Yes.
It's no longer a west to the rest world. We live in a world where it's literally from everywhere and to everyone.
Yes.
And I think they're going to hear different perspectives on these things from all over the world.
Yeah.
So, Nicole, you just recently, you're one of the smartest people I know, and you just recently wrote a book.
I would say that about you, but go ahead.
That's very kind of you, but it's not true. So you just recently wrote a book.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the book.
So the book is Nailing It: Why Successful Leadership Demands Suffering and Surrender. And I think a lot of what we've talked about are some principles that I've tried to wrestle with in this book. I think we have become obsessed with a world that's always triumphant, with even a gospel that's always on the up and up, that your best day is next. And with Jesus, you can soar the skies because you have resurrection power, you have grace and glory, and you have the Holy Spirit. So nothing can, come against you. We have this wonderful resurrection gospel that is real, but it lacks the depth of crucifixion. And I think where we are today, and one of the greatest gifts we can offer younger generations today, is the sense of resilience that comes from carrying your cross in the valley. The gospel will always lead us to the mountaintops. We will always have that day when the new heavens and the new earth will be manifest. And until then, we have a gospel that anchors us in the dark parts, in the times when we do not feel triumphant, in the times when we need a resilience to carry us through the challenges and the trauma of our times. And I do think younger generations are tired of what feels like a cotton candy style, happy-go-lucky gospel. I've got the joy down in my heart, when really they've got depression that they're wrestling with, and really they're struggling with their anxiety. So this book is about crucifying worldly principles that cause us to put on masks and facades so that we can dig into the depth of Scripture that anchors us for the time of resurrection. You cannot have resurrection without crucifixion. And that's the core point of what I'm trying to share.
Wow. That is a great principle for leaders. I remember when I was a teenager, there was a girl that had been my girlfriend when I was like in middle school, and her dad liked me. And
Yeah,
so
that's
even though there was no future for us, her dad would say, but her dad wasn't a believer. And I remember I talked to him about it, even through high school and stuff. And I just remember saying to me one time, Mark, if I really believed what you are claiming, I would have to leave everything and tell everybody.
Wow.
And that for me, I was like, he ministered back to me, because what he's basically saying is what you're talking about in your book, right?
That's it.
Are you really willing to die?
Yep.
For what this really is going to take to lead.
Right.
He knew that was going to require something of him if he really believed it, if he assented to that belief.
Yes.
And it made me go, wait a minute, do I? Am I living that? Am I believing this? Am I, willing to go there? And I think you're right. I think this generation is looking for something, more, Yeah. Well, anything else before we say goodbye and see everybody at Urbana in December?
Yeah. I mean, as I really think about my hopes and dreams for younger generations and even for Urbana, I really do pray that we can get beyond the platforms and the likes and, the going viral and the wanting to be an influencer. I really pray that we can get beyond that, because once we get to those places, we realize just how empty they are. There are people with millions of followers that are so lonely. There are people who are well known that feel like their lives have no meaning. But if we can really cling to the cross, then we will find a gospel that will sustain us and keep us and elevate us as we lower ourselves before Jesus. So my hope for Urbana is that young people will come bringing their full selves to the cross, and that they would find Christ meeting them at their lowest points, at their deepest points of need. And when they encounter Christ through the relationships, through the conversations, through the inspiration, through the challenges, when they encounter Christ in that way, they will have a deeper joy in resurrection, because they know that Christ is with them through the suffering and the pain. So I really can't wait. I am so excited about it. I really deeply believe God's going to do something special in our time together.
Yeah, well, and we are praying for you as you prepare, and
thank you.
The Lord helps you craft a message to share with us all in December of 2025. Nicole, Nicole, thank you so much for joining me here today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for saying yes to Urbana.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it.
Isn't Nicole Martin amazing?
Yeah, absolutely. She's like my new hero. Just listening to her talk about all of these things, I'm like, wow, here's someone who's thinking really critically about things I also like thinking about, but truly articulating them with so much more grace and energy than I ever could. So yeah, that was really a fascinating conversation.
Well, she's, just involved in has her ear to the ground in so many different areas that she just kind of sees things from a really broad perspective, which is really fun. One of the things that really stood out to me, there's so many, but one of the things was what she was talking about with the females leaving the church, and that we're losing a lot of young women. And at the same time, we are seeing a lot of men really leaning into the church, and we're seeing a lot of growth in that area. Phoebe, I'm just curious from your perspective, because a lot of these women that are leaving the church are your age. What did you think of that? What did you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's a sad reality that I've been seeing in my own context too. And I think there's a variety of factors, like she mentioned. I think with Christian nationalism on the rise, a lot of these young men are coming in to have a more just conservative space for them to voice their ideas, which isn't bad or wrong. But I think in that we can unintentionally excuse or exclude rather women from being in those spaces. And I think also just there's a lot of church hurt that can come along with narrow-mindedness And I think a lot of times women can bear the brunt of that. And so Nicole, as a woman, actually hearing her perspective on that was really validating for what I'm seeing in my context. I really liked her point that Jesus was not picky in that he drew both men and women to himself. And we see that throughout the Gospels. We see Mary Magdalene becoming one of his closest followers and closest disciples. And I think that's really key in looking at, as churches, how are we making sure that everyone feels welcome and that there aren't these kind of undercurrents that make people feel excluded and unwelcome or just like, yeah, how do we be hospitable? How do we be a home to everyone as Jesus was, and make sure that we are not unintentionally or intentionally excluding people from the church? I think that's where it all starts.
Yeah, it's really interesting because women have always been, even going back to, Jesus' presence, have always been drawn to the church and spiritually. I think you go all the way back to the Garden of Eden when, part of the consequence of the fall was that there was enmity between Satan and Eve, right? And that there's this natural proclivity to move away from what is evil and into what is good. But in whatever this correction is that we're experiencing in our society right now, my big concern is that we swing back too far, right? And so maybe men were being alienated from the church and society and different things like that. But at the same time, what we don't want to do is replace it with like a hyper toxic masculinity. This is a moment for us in the church to do biblically the right things. And when we're talking about whether it be missions, cross-cultural, intercultural efforts, diversity issues, we want to make sure that we are rooted in sound scripture and that we have a biblical worldview around these things, that we're not just embracing what's going on in the larger culture and society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's like a narrow line to walk. I think I heard recently, like, the narrow road is not narrow because it's cruel, but because it's hard to walk, because it's sacred. And I think that's a really key idea here, that that if we hold fast to the theological and biblical truth that we know to be sound, that will leave room for everyone. I truly believe that. But to get there, we have to really examine what are the ideas, maybe from our culture, that we tend to add to the gospel. And Jesus plus anything is not the gospel. The gospel is Jesus, as a living, breathing person, as well as God. And I think we have to recognize the person of Jesus and how he walked on this earth and remember that truth above all. And everything should flow out of the person of Jesus. So, yeah.
I think that's what I love about, intercultural engagement and seeing the church express itself in culture, is it helps us find those things that are the greater truths, of what Christianity is. Because Christianity, it's almost like the gospel attaches itself to culture and changes it and transforms it. It isn't a culture in and of itself in a way,
Right.
but it takes what is already there and redeems it in a beautiful way and helps us find the edges. So what's something else that stood out to you in the conversation with Nicole?
I think in that, I was just thinking about how she said, like, missionaries must learn culture, but not become it. I think that's a really like useful heuristic for, are we doing missions correctly in a different cultural context? Because I think it's really easy to fall on the becoming side of things when we're doing ministry or we're doing missions, and just kind of meld into the overall culture that surrounds us. And I think there's something really beautiful about starting in humility in order to learn something. Like, we come in with an educational mindset where, as we're being sent out by God to be witnesses in a specific context, how do we come in with humility and say, I want to learn here and learn about this culture, but not necessarily just form myself to be like the world around me? I think that's a really stark call for us as Christians, and really just was convicting for me.
Well, I'm excited for you to meet Nicole and to hear from her more at Urbana, because she's going to be one of our opening speakers. At least that's where we have her slotted right now, and subject to change always. But I'm really excited for everybody to get to know her better and to hear more from her and the things that God's laying on her heart for Urbana. So, all right. Well, hey, Phoebe, thanks for being with me again today. And thanks everybody else for listening to us on the Urbana podcast. We'll see you next time.